Hello, class. I hope that you guys are staying well and that your loved ones are staying healthy during this pandemic. And I also hope that you guys are keeping up with your studies. I don't know going forward with this if we are going to be, how long these AMI days will last. It's definitely not in my jurisdiction to say that we're going to extend it, but I can see it happening. So moving on forward, if we do extend it, what I plan to do is kind of like these weekly videos to talk about some of these big themes that we would have really talked about in class. In particular, because I like John Green and I like a lot of the videos that I'm able to show you guys with TED Ed as well. But there's just some really big theme and big connections that I want to try to really just talk to you guys about in a very short video. So this is our first installment of this, and if need be, we will continue this every week. This week, you guys were learning about America in the 1950s. You were learning about Cold War foreign policy. You should have had your readings, that John Green video, a couple of discussion posts, or one discussion post. But a lot of what you're going to be doing now, moving forward with these online classes, is going to be really self-learning. I did 2 years of online class, and really, you just kind of figure out that in the end, that's what online class is about. It's not really, a teacher's not really there to guide you and remind you of things. It's really up to you on your own to have that independence to be able to figure out, well, if I'm not learning this material, what can I do? And in particular, also realizing that, hey, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I have these due dates, and really keeping up with that. So what you're experiencing here in my class, I'm going to try to organize it a lot like online classes that I've had in the past. And seeing as my associates was complete online as well as my master's, I think I have a lot of experience with online classes. So I'm going to try to frame it in a way in which whenever you have online classes in college, you're kind of used to that, to those methods. In particular, using like discussion post and a lot of independent reading with those short video segments is really common. Okay, on to class contents. Oh, and if you guys know, if you have any questions at all, you have the Remind Me, in which you can just use that to text my phone, and then also email, of course. So reach out if you need help. Okay. And that's how you do it. Okay, sorry. Okay. Right after World War II, we are going to have different changes within the American society and economy. In particular, you need to understand that following World War II, we're going to have a tremendous amount of changes in the way in which Americans really view their lives and the way in which Americans view buying culture, known as consumer culture. You guys know in the 1920s, we talked about this a little bit, the birth really of consumerism within the United States. But at this time, we're really going to see consumerism really expand into becoming ingrained within the American culture. In which, if you guys see this image that I have right here, this kind of exemplifies this for us. You have this family, and surrounded by this family is all this stuff. And the idea at this time was that as you have people coming home from the war, They're going to buy houses, in particular in suburbs that we're fixing to talk about in a minute. And whenever you buy a house in a nice suburb, you're going to need all this stuff to fill all this house. At this time, you also have this generation being born known as the baby boomers, called such because of the boom in population of babies being born right after World War II. And with these new babies and nuclear families, you're also going to have this idea of consumer culture, which is good for the American economy in the fact that you have a lot of new technology being developed to really adhere to this consumer culture and fulfilling your house with all these just wonderful things that you must have. And in addition to this, it's helping to fund the American economy. So you have new technology being developed to meet the new consumer needs as well as people paying for them. And it's really helping to just boost our economy all around. At this time period, during the 50s, we are going to see a decline in manufacturing, which you guys know manufacturing power is really what gave America the edge in which we had both in World War I and World War II. So we are going to see a decline in manufacturing power within the U.S., but instead that's going to give way to our service industry, basically going from the quote-unquote blue-collared work to white-collared work. This is really going to happen, and majority of Americans are going to take up some sort of service industry job during the 50s. Majority of Americans now have service industry or white-collared work for the first time in America. We're going to have more of a decline in farming, which you guys know since the early 1900s, we have seen a decline in not only the number of people with farms, but the size of those farms as well. What's really happening is not only do we have fewer farms, we have larger farms, and the place of those farms within the United States is also changing. And what we're growing at this time is changing too. We're going to shift from that cotton focus to soybean, rice, poultry during this time. All right, guys, so post-World War II migration. A couple of things you need to know. Number one, suburbs, which if I can move this, you guys can see this picture a little bit better. Okay. All right. Within this time, we're going to have the suburbanization of the United States, in which people are moving from city, urban dwelling centers to suburbs, generally around that city. And suburb life has continued throughout, up to current times, in which majority of middle class Americans want to live in a type of suburb around a city, which if you will look at like our city, Little Rock, you can see those suburbs really sprawling out, not only north, but you can also see that, you see that south, you see that west, within West Little Rock, for an example. Here in Atlanta, where I am currently, people don't really live in Atlanta. People live in the suburbs around Atlanta. Like around actual city of Atlanta, you have about almost 100-mile radius of all of these suburbs. And whenever people say that I live in Atlanta, I'm from Atlanta, they generally mean the suburbs of Atlanta. And this kind of life in which we live in these suburban dwellings around cities is really going to start during this time period. And because we now have suburbs, we are going to need a more extensive highway system. Now, a lot of the highways in which we use today, in particular I-40, highway, maybe interstate would have been a better word here. But I-40, if you guys ever go out to California, you're going to be on I-40. And that was actually constructed, led by Eisenhower at the time for two main reasons. Number one, we had economic growth. We had those suburbs, and we needed to connect Americans and make travel much easier. In addition, we had those Cold War scares in which some of I-40 was actually laid so that in case of a nuclear war, we're able to get supplies to majority across the United States, which is why I-40 connects from the West Coast to the East Coast. One downside to these suburbs at the time, and something that's not really talked about very often, is the fact that suburbs really led to housing segregation. There is a good video on Netflix. It's called the Racial Wealth Gap in America. If you guys want to watch it, it's only like 15 minutes. It's pretty good. But it really talks about this phenomenon in which we see these suburbs arising, and within these suburbs, we actually see minority groups being denied the right to not only purchase a house there, which the actual suburb company building the houses would just refuse to sell houses to minorities. But if a minority wanted to go and get a loan on a house, sometimes the banks would just outright refuse to give the same loans to minorities that they would to people of European descent at this time. So this leads to housing segregation, and if you watch the video, is one of the causes to the current racial wealth gap today. Migration in America. One of your actual curriculum in which the AP board wants you guys to know is the growth of the Sun Belt region during this time. So basically, we have a lot of Americans, and you have a map down here that shows this, but you have a lot of Americans who are moving out west, not only out west, but down south, in what we generally deem the Sun Belt region. Okay, so culture. There's two things you need to know about culture during the 50s. Number one is consumer. It's all about consumption, consumer culture out the wazoo. And then we have consensus culture. And consensus culture was huge at this time. You guys have read about it. You're going to watch or listen to a song about it if you guys haven't already. But the idea here within consensus culture was the idea that Americans need to conform to a national culture, that national culture being represented with the middle class. And at this time, right after World War II, we have a lot of economic boom, a lot of prosperity. We have a lot of technology advancements, and the TV is one thing that we're going to see that really gains presence during this time. So if we look at basically right after World War II up until the end of the 50s, you basically go from having 2 or 3 American households out of 10 with a TV to the very end of the 50s, in which 9 out of 10 of American households have television. It's really replaced. If you guys remember, we talked about the radio and how the radio really unified American national culture during the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. But in the 50s, we're gradually going to see the TV replace the radio. Not only are we going to see this consensus culture being perpetuated with the TV, but we're also going to see ideas of the American dream. This idea that the American dream is to buy a home in a suburb somewhere, raise some kids, have those kids go off to college, then those kids buy themselves a little suburb home. You're going to retire. You're going to take trips in the summer, vacations, the idea of getting away. This idea of the American dream is really going to be formed at this time with consensus culture. This idea that there is one picture or one kind of revolving theme around American culture. And consensus culture really accumulates this into this little nice package of the American dream. We also see the nuclear family being perpetuated at this time. Nuclear family meaning you have generally one male, one female family with 2 children, usually living in a suburb home. Nuclear family. In addition, this time period, we're also going to see the strengthening of American soft power abroad. So you have two different kinds of power when we talk about foreign policy. You have hard power, generally referring